Richard Wiseman, Ph.D., might first be described as a man with a mission, a reputational hitman, a Terminator, with no need for a hyperalloy combat chassis, just a good knowledge of stats, which is about all a parapsychology degree is, and a book to his name, to infiltrate those science circles, and do as much damage as possible to key people, and research, like Rupert Sheldrake, to retard the advance of parapsychology, which is anathema to the Tavistock corporatocracy's saturation preached, disconnected, materialist, atheist, Marxist image of man. They feel that's all the peasants need to know about, to best control them. And CSICOP, the Peak Skeptic organization, is a team of such hitmen, including James Randi and Michael Shermer, Susan Blackmore, to keep society ignorant of their potential, as long as possible. To discredit, and thus bury, liberating truths, uncovered, and publicized by a handful of adventurous scientists, exploring taboo subjects, like psi. Here we focus on the most blatant, and recognized reputational hitman, from CSICOP, operative Richard Wiseman, Ph.D. Wiseman is a fellow of CSICOP, a consultant editor of the Skeptical Inquirer, and an associate of Rationalist International. Having started his career as a conjurer, he took a degree in psychology, and a Ph.D. in parapsychology from Edinburgh University, and is now based in the psychology department, at the University of Hertfordshire. And he is the author of Deception and Self-Deception, Investigating Psychics. And related to that is his personal mendacity, which is legendary, among his professional associates, reported below. He is Britain's most ambitious and ubiquitous media skeptic, and has appeared in hundreds of TV and radio programs. In 1995 he was awarded a Paratoric Research Fellowship for Psychical Research, and according to his website has received more than 400,000 sterling in grants. He has been at the center of many controversies with researchers in parapsychology, and has often been accused of deliberately misrepresenting data. In 1995, he replicated Rupert Sheldrake's results with a dog that knows when its owner was coming home, and then claimed to have debunked the psychic pet phenomenon, a diametrically opposite mendacious conclusion, to peer-reviewed Sheldrake. And Wiseman organized massive media publicity of his own false conclusion, as if it were scientific fact. Even Susan Blackmore got involved in a desperate attempt to demolish Sheldrake's psychic dog study, and she was later proved lying, also. But the Tavistock Press ran those scurrilous stories independently, it was claimed, spreading Wiseman's falsehoods, that he never uttered, lied Wiseman. It seems Wiseman can't even lie straight in bed. But later this happened. Headline: Skeptic demonstrates psi. Richard Wiseman's admission. Although Richard Wiseman originally claimed that his experiments with JT refuted the psychic pet phenomenon, in an interview on April 17, 2007, with Alex Sikaris, on the Skeptico website, he now admits that "I don't think there is any debate that the patterning in my studies is the same as the patterning in Rupert's studies, it's how it's interpreted." Code 4. I was just lying, as usual. Lengthy discussion at sheldrake.org. Wiseman has been described by the president of the Parapsychology Association as motivated by obvious self-interest and by a desire to support an a priori commitment to the notion that all positive psi results are spurious, and all methods which seem to show the presence of psi are flawed, a diplomatic euphemism for a career parapsychology saboteur, hinting at narcissism. In December 2000, he carried out what he described as the world's biggest RVESP experiment, which, like many of his activities, was widely publicized in the media. A skeptical observer of the experiment claimed that he had designed the experiment to fail, and interfered with the procedure in such a way as to gain the non-significant result he expected. RV disproven, he trumpeted. Brief summary here. Along comes Richard Wiseman, describing in New Scientist, the 10th of June, 2009, his latest publicity stunt, under the modest title "Tweeting My Way to a Scientific Breakthrough Results," according to an editorial, failed to show any support for the paranormal. They do indeed, as one does not have to be psychic to have predicted, for this was clearly another of those experiments that are designed to come up with negative results, and reassure the general public that psi is a load of rubbish. but one report reader, whose views deserve respect, Professor Brian Josephson, Nobel laureate, made a similar point to others. Any accurate remote viewing in the group would have been lost in a combination of noise from those not having those skills, and systematic error, designed to fail. It would have been better, he added, too politely, if the experimenter had discussed methodological issues with experts in the field before starting the experiment. Had he done so, he would have been told that judging of RV tests should be done by impartial outsiders, not by the subjects themselves, and certainly not by pseudo-skeptical investigators, and b. that to do good RV, subjects need training. Expecting an unselected sample of the general public to demonstrate it on demand is totally unrealistic. Wiseman prefaces his report with a brief reference to the U.S. Army's Stargate project, which trained military remote viewers, and used them for nearly 20 years. Some have claimed that results supported RV's existence, he conceded. They have indeed. The U.S. Army, for example, which awarded one of its longest-serving viewers, Joe McMoneagle, the Legion of Merit. This is given for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services and achievements, and Joe's citation credited him with producing crucial and vital intelligence unavailable from any other source. Quite an impressive claim, you might think. Wiseman, as it happens, has met McMoneagle, and witnessed an experiment he carried out some years ago at the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina, so he knows perfectly well how RV is done properly, having seen for himself. After Joe had made a drawing of a target location, the 30 attendees were shown the usual 5 photos of possible sites, and 29 of them picked the right one. Wiseman then complained that the controls were not tight enough, so McMoneagle invited him to take over the protocol and run it any way he liked the following day, which he duly did. Joe still got 29 first-place matches out of 30. Not surprisingly, as Joe notes in his book, The Stargate Chronicles, page 251, Richard has refused to discuss it since. The hitman silent. Why no massive publicity this time? Answer: it doesn't suit his anti-sci Marxist materialist cause. SkepticalInvestigations.org. In September 2004 he took part in a classic CSICOP debunking exercise, claiming that a young Russian girl who had seemingly psychic powers of diagnosis had failed a test he and his fellow skeptics designed. In fact, the girl scored at a level well above chance. Professor Brian Josephson, a Nobel laureate in physics, investigated Wiseman's claims about this test, and found them to be seriously misleading. In our Media Watch feature, Guy Lyon Playfair doubts Wiseman's claim of a breakthrough in his attempt to debunk remote viewing. Yes, he had claimed his tweeting would debunk RV. By the autumn of 2004, after a series of other very questionable claims, widely publicized in the media, many of his peers, in the parapsychology research community, concluded that his behavior was not consistent with commonly accepted standards of scientific integrity, and he was voted off the main research forum in parapsychology, by a large majority. In addition, for similar reasons, some members of the Society for Psychical Research called for him to be expelled from the society. He resigned. Despite his strong skeptical beliefs, note the career hypocrisy. In 2004 he applied for the newly established chair of parapsychology in Lund, Sweden, which was endowed to promote research in this field. So he hoped to continue his career in demolition of parapsychology in Sweden. Source: SkepticalInvestigations.org. There are very few parapsychologists in the world, 20 or 30 even fewer, who have received Wiseman's level of funding, more than £400,000, and then been very carefully and deliberately ostracized after being given enough rope to hang himself. Likely he is the only parapsychologist in the world drummed out of his own profession for conspicuously unscientific conduct long-term. Latest: a penetrating critique by Chris Carter of Richard Wiseman's latest attack on parapsychology, has Heads I Win, Tails You Lose, paper published in Skeptical Inquirer, source: SkepticalInvestigations.org. Carter's conclusion about Wiseman's lifelong practice here. Conclusions: here we have 3 clear-cut cases in which Wiseman adopted a Heads I Win, Tails You Lose strategy, that is, using tricks to ensure he gets the results he wants to present. How does he do it? He has 2 basic techniques. 1. ignoring statistical techniques and standards that are commonly accepted in all areas of scientific inquiry. 2. Arbitrarily excluding data counter to his a priori opposition to the existence of psi. What can be done about this? Simply being aware of Wiseman's history of using these tricks to dismiss positive results helps ensure that we will check to see if either technique has been used whenever he appears in the media to debunk the work of professional researchers. Also, we need to always remember that many controversies in science have a strong ideological component, and so what is presented as good science is occasionally, upon closer inspection, nothing of the sort. Chris Carter. We must ask, what is Wiseman's motivation for his lifelong war of mendacity and fraud against humanity? It certainly doesn't seem to be general affection for mankind, or advancing frontiers of knowledge. Quite the opposite. He seeks to obscure and conceal numerous valuable truths from the common man, with great and criminal determination. A career of sustained cruelty. Are lifelong liars, frauds ever driven by kindness or affection toward others? Do they want to make the world a better place? Are they committed to their fellow man? Or is it just being famous by hook or by crook, essentially psychopathic narcissism? Being famous, and in the process repeatedly basking in one's superiority, by playing it off, by so skillfully lying, mistakenly believing they will never know what's really going on. But we do, Mr. Wiseman, so you are lying mostly, and only, to yourself, and believing your own lies. What rich delusion! And this narcissism personality defect is common to career militant atheists. Just watch. If one looks at Wiseman's own website, the reader encounters an extraordinary hyperbolic self-praise, as well as further adulation from another narcissistic pseudo-skeptic, Michael Shermer. We are told there, the UK population should be grateful to have Richard Wiseman. Amongst them, he is listed in the top 100 Englishmen, we are told. Now here is a clue, reported by close relatives to journalist Peter Foges, of another militant atheist, Professor Sir Alfred Jules Ayer, who had an NDE. To give context to this mini-medical drama, it's important to bear in mind that A.J. Ayer was an atheist. Not just any old atheist, the atheist, as far as millions of Britons were concerned. Another Wiseman, in addition to establishing his reputation as one of the great analytic and rationalist philosophers of the century with such works as Language, Truth, and Logic and Foundations of Empirical Knowledge, Ayer had spent most of his life putting the case very publicly on radio and television, as well as in print, for the non-existence of God, indeed arguing that the very idea of God was devoid of meaning, a position known in theology as igtheism. He had gone 12 rounds with the best and the brightest of the bishops and theologians in the land, and in the public mind he was thought, in the main, to have triumphed. So the NDE happened to this champion lifelong atheist. He wrote about his experience in 2 pieces. The second in particular, Ayer was clearly at pains to preserve his reputation, of which he was almost childishly proud. Relatives pointed out, despite meeting impressive entities etc., despite the river, the light, and the rude, dismissive masters of the universe, they ignored him. How dare they ignore me? The experience had turned him into a born-again atheist, he maintained, reaffirming his conviction that God was a barbarous relic, the afterlife a fairy tale. That was in public. His famous career position, restated. Privately, and secretly, the story is more intriguing. On the day of that first death of NDE, Dr. George returned to Ayer's bedside. I came back to talk to him later that evening, he reported. Very discreetly, I asked him, as a philosopher, what was it like to have had a near-death experience. He suddenly looked rather sheepish. Then he said, I saw a divine being. I'm afraid I'm going to have to revise all my various books and opinions. When Ayer was released by his doctors a month later, friends and family did notice that he'd changed. He became so much nicer after he died, was the mordant, biting way my mother-in-law, Dee Wells, put it to Cash. He was not nearly so boastful. He took an interest in other people. For the first time in his life, he became a lot less selfish, less narcissistic, more grown up. Became so much nicer. Cared about others. That's all Wiseman has to do.